Thanks for having me. The first rule of giving talks is you're supposed to start with a joke, and I used to. But you know, as the stuff that I talk about gets more and more dire, like my heart has gone out of it a little bit, you know. But also, luckily, many of the people at the conference have already been over to the pub, so they might not notice anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Now, the way I'm going to do this is I am going to start by telling you, and particularly I know the people in the conference, stuff that you already know because they already know it, and they've all said many of these things, okay? So I hope you have a little patience with me because I'm going to start really kind of pedestrian. But then I hope that you see that I'm going to try to reorganize them into a story that you may not really know, or at least not be familiar with anyway, okay? There it is. There's a lot of argument about what the right, you know, what would the right mean global temperature be? I don't want to go into that. But, you know, there's a number of different ones reported by the British Met Office, and, you know, they all pretty much have been going up. I mean, see, I'm telling you things that you already knew. That atmospheric carbon dioxide in parts per million has been pretty much going straight up for quite a while now. This one is nice because it's from the same collection point throughout time, so it's very comparable. And this isn't even up to date. There are now a number of measurements of about 400 parts per million that we've broken 400 now. So that's where we are, but you guys already knew that. That's just a table summarizing a whole bunch of the various IPCC reports, but also, I think, you know, some of the other models as well. And I think one of the more striking things about all of those is that however much you hear from, you know, your local press or, you know, where I come from, Fox or whatever, you know, they're all pretty close. You see, I mean, you don't get that impression, I think, even here, possibly. So it's just something to see that, you know, pretty much everyone is giving similar guesses as to where things are going. But you already knew that. Okay? Now, if we already know this, then that shouldn't be an issue of contention, right? You know, like we should move on and start talking about other stuff like what to do about it and things like that. But what's interesting, or what will be interesting from what I have to say, that we also have a lot of good evidence that resistance to even admitting those three things that I just showed you is going up, not down, over our recent past. I've got some examples there. The Harris polls in 2007 found, by their estimate, that 71% of Americans believed fossil fuel burning caused climate change. By June 2011, it was only 41%. It's quite a drop in a short period of time. And while not every, you know, poll gives the same numbers, blah blah blah, the drop is kind of pretty noticeable across the board. And there has come to be an increasing fascination as to where does this denialism come from. Now, I don't know if you guys have had a chance to see particularly the book by Mirowski and Eric Conway, Emergence of Doubt. I mean, look, if you don't read anything else, read that. I mean, it's really it's a tremendous eye-opener, I think. But, you know, if you want to know even a little bit more, I don't know if you've seen this more recent book by Robert Proctor called Golden Holocaust. That's not about climate change so much, but it is about the tobacco strategy. And it's probably the best history of the tobacco strategy over the recent past from all those documents that came from the document dump of the court settlement, okay? And in working on this, Robert Proctor has also coined the term agnotology, which I'm going to find useful. And he's got an edited volume on that. I'm not going to do it, but the short version of it is that he thinks there's a new phenomenon here. That phenomenon is the conscious manufacture of doubt in the larger public about very specific issues. So that's why the tobacco strategy is so important, because for a long time, even though, as he documents, they knew that it was causing cancer back in the 50s, please, and the Nazis knew in the 30s, so that's also his work. So I mean, so they knew. So what they were trying to do is they're trying to create confusion. I'm going to come back to that, because that's going to be a kind of important phenomenon, it seems to me. But anyway, so here, what I'm pointing to now is that there's all this interest in trying to explain how can this reversal that's happening, this denial, be brought about? Who's doing it? Why? How can they do it? Now, I would also argue that while those books are wonderful, they also fall short. They fall short in a very specific way. That ultimately, I think both Naomi and Proctor come up against a kind of a wall. They can't really explain why these guys do it, I mean, in any satisfactory sense, except that they like all believe in free markets. That's Naomi's line, in fact. You can see that all over that. They believe in free markets, so they were willing to, I don't know, prostitute their science or something because they believed in free markets. Okay, that's one of the things I want to think hard about today, whether that's even believable. I don't think that that's exactly right. Okay. And, there's data on this, too. I know, possibly many of you are not, close readers of the American Journal of Sociology. Strangely enough, I am. There's a very recent article by Gordon Gauchat that demonstrates, I think in a wonderful way, with a huge data set, that much of the science skepticism is really located on the political right. Now, people have said this, blah, 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 right? But he demonstrates it, that, actually the kind of the attitudes towards science have been pretty flat on the, left, or I hate to call it liberal because I'm going to talk about neoliberalism in a minute, but, this kind of, that side of things have not changed all that much. It's nice. It's a panel over time. But there's been a huge, huge decline, which is, what we're curious about. And it's on the right. Okay? So that's useful, too. And then finally, we have the phenomenon that I've even noticed in the, of course, I managed to come here right when the carbon tax kicked in, so there's something about that may have made this more salient. But, you're getting a kind of a real increase of denialism here, too, it looks like to me. Like this Ian Plimmer book on giving away to kids in schools to, talk back to their students. Yeah, do you know? It's, boy, wow. So anyway, so you've got it, too, okay? Now, what I'm interested in is how the left can and should come to understand this, and then what it might do about it, all right? So that's kind of, weirdly enough, that's one of the main themes of my talk. And the person I'm going to pick on here is Naomi Klein. Now, I'm doing this because I like Naomi Klein. I think, Naomi's wonderful. That's not a problem. It's just that she falls into what I consider to be a really kind of serious trap faced with all that stuff that I've just told you. And just so you know that I'm not making it up, but you know that, I want to read a quote from her. I should give you the context. She went to a meeting of the Heartland Institute, which is one of the main think tanks in America that promulgates the denialism, okay? Because she wanted to figure out, what do they really believe, so forth and so on. And her story, in a nutshell, is that they believe this because they think that the other side will use this as a Trojan horse for socialism. Okay? And just so that you don't think I'm misrepresenting, let me read you a quote. And this is from her article in The Nation last year, so September, something like that. Perhaps we should listen to their theories more closely. She means by them, Heartland. They might just understand something that the left still doesn't get. Heartland's Bass, this is the head guy of Heartland back then, puts it even more bluntly. For the left, climate change is the perfect thing. It's the reason why we should do everything the left wanted to do anyway, close quote. Here's my inconvenient truth. We're back to Naomi now. Here's my inconvenient truth. They aren't wrong. The crowd gathered at Heartland may be in considerable less denial than a lot of professional environmentalists, the ones who paint a picture of global warming Armageddon, then assure us that we can avert catastrophe by buying green products and creating clever markets in pollution. End of quote. Okay? All right, so you with me so far? Now we've got a relatively famous figure on the top left, anyway, sort of saying, well, the reason they're willing to go this route is because they think that really this is about big political issues about the economy, not the ones that you would think, but the ones about, oh, this gives them the opening that they've always wanted all along. All right? Now, I'm going to get a little critical here. I hope I don't rub anybody the wrong way. This repeats a canard that I think dates back to J.B. Bernal, and a lot of you are not going to know who he is. Too bad, because in a sense, he set up this whole story of politics and science, which then became very popular in the 20th century. Okay, and the story was that science is on the side of the left. Okay, it's on the side of the left because it's rational, right? What Klein, let me just read a small bit of the paper here. What Klein has done is revive a theme which dates back to J.B. Bernal, if not earlier. If one accepts that the salient political divide is situated between a monolithic market and the only earthly power which can venture to challenge it, namely the monolithic state, then science is the best ally that the political left could ever wish for. Implicitly, science is the province of rationality, prudence, and planning, whereas the market is the world of rapture, mania, excess, and wishful thinking. Science is from Mars, the market is from Mercury. This has also been treated like left and right hemispheres of the cerebellum. Inbred political stances reduced to brain abnormalities and fMRI scans. Since neurons are destiny, science not only tutors us when we're correct, but why our opponents are so congenitally misguided. And I'm actually kind of hinting at somebody there who you don't know who is. This is Chris Mooney guy, who has actually argued that, you know, people who lean left have different kind of brains than people who lean right. Whatever. I just, you know, this is where we're at these days, okay? It's just reporting so far. Now, I think this line is especially treacherous. And that's part of my argument today, the line that Naomi is taking. It's treacherous because it misunderstands science and the history of science. And it's treacherous because it misunderstands neoliberalism and the history of neoliberalism. So that's kind of bad, huh? Now, look, I've got biopolitics in the title, so you all know I had to say something about Foucault, right? So I'm going to do it now and then get it over with. You know, in part, I do use the term biopolitics because I think his late lectures on neoliberalism are amazing. They really are perceptive. I mean, somebody back in, you know, 78, foreseeing what would you got to give it to him, right? I mean, whatever else you might think about him and stuff. I mean, he saw something, all right? But, I don't think we're going to get very far in these things that concern us if we take Foucault's definition of biopolitics at face value. Because he only got neoliberalism, in a sense, half right. Of course, Foucault would be interested in the side of neoliberalism that's all about technologies of the self. What else was Foucault about? Come on, I mean, you know, of course he would see that. Of course he would be fascinated by Gary Becker in particular, and so, I mean, you know, yeah. But he also allows, with the neoliberals, that the market exists as a regime of truth in political theory. This is all for all you little Foucaultians out there. I mean, I'm not going to go into this. And what's really noticeable about him and his late work is that he never really applies that wonderful jaundiced eye to markets in the same way that he applies it to the state. There's a deep asymmetry in Foucault, which I think, you know, if we want to talk about it later, I don't think that's an accident. But whatever. All you got to do is give me the asymmetry. All right. And so if you give me the asymmetry, all right, he is not going to help us understand the way in which these appeals to markets cause people to take these political positions, strangely enough. And moreover, it also ignores agnotology because he treats the market as a regime of truth. You see? So that all that stuff that I was talking about earlier is, in a sense, unfocused in Foucault. And that's unfortunate, I would argue. So, you know, not that anyone really cares. I don't hear lots of groans, so we can move on. Now, here's something that I have to do really quickly, although luckily Jeremy helped out by beginning to tell you. Look, something I've worked on my whole life, as long as I've been writing, is that what's amazing about the history of Western thought is that the market and nature are not two separate things. I know this is a little disturbing. I think time and time again, what I've uncovered in a lot of my own work is that nature is used to define the economy, and economy is then used to define nature. It's just this incredible round robin. Now, see, some of you are going to squint and say, what do you mean by that? Look, I'm sorry, I got all those books that he mentioned, all right? That's what they're about. They're about utility being a ripoff of potential energy from mid-19th century energy physics. You realize that's where neoclassicism came from? It's a physics ripoff. And they said so. You don't have to believe me, all right? There are endless examples of this. I mean, it gets boring after a while. The Black-Scholes model for, you know, finance, you know, that's just the heat transfer equation. Do you know that? Look, I couldn't make this stuff up, okay? I mean, constantly they're taking these models over and defining the market to operate like a physical process. That's all you got to give me. And then, I don't have time to do this, there's a lot of transfer from economics into the natural sciences as well. And you know one place where there's a lot of transfer? Ecology. There's a lot of transfer from economics into ecological models. So, my point is, it goes in two directions. Now, what should we take from that bidirectional history? The point of this whirlwind tour of the history of economic thought and the history of science is to suggest that the dominant images of nature have never been very far removed from dominant images of economic activity. Indeed, many of the same formalisms and ontological commitments tend to cover both, although the periods of orthodoxy in the respective fields may move out of phase. Therefore, in the long horizon of Western thought, nature is not something external that hems the economy in. Rather, they constitute and mimic one another. See, this is the problem. Because I think a lot of environmentalists would prefer to have it that this nature is this rock against which the economy dashes. right? Or it is limited by. But see, the problem with that is that if you got this long history of transfer and cross-dressing, how can that be true? See, that's the problem that I want to raise. And then, I try to get a little cute here. For in the West, it is hard to sustain the pretense that economy and nature are pitted in remorseless conflict, as it is to acknowledge that Jesus was not a Caucasian or that money never buys happiness. Philosophers such as Derrida have made us more aware of the unstable antinomies, or as he dubbed them, the ghost of the undecidable. And so that's kind of what I'm suggesting here, that because we have such trouble knowing where nature ends and the economy begins, or vice versa, it's almost impossible for people to hold in their mind the idea that one is opposed to the other. Okay, that's the beginning of my argument. Okay? Now, that sounds awfully vague and sort of, generalized and so forth and so on. So, let me talk very briefly about neoclassical economics. Okay. Now, here's another point that I want to make, and I can't make it in any short way, so I apologize. I'm just going to say it. Neoclassical economics is not at all the same as neoliberalism. Not at all. It is true that the neoclassical economics profession has become more neoliberal as we get closer to the present. That is true. But the two are wildly different. And while I don't have time to specify all the ways that they're wildly different, although it should tell us something that, Hayek, when he finally gets his big day in the sun, he gets his little Nobel, which is not a Nobel, it's a Bank of Sweden prize. But anyway, when he finally gets that day in the sun, what does he do? He starts knocking neoclassical equilibrium. See, you should realize that there's something really going on here, that they really are different, you know what I mean? So anyway, and by the way, my job here is not really to talk a lot about neoclassicism, so I'm just going to make some generalizations before I move on. Neoclassicism used to be this imitation of physics, which was this idea that, it's a static allocation device, and I do mean a device. It's like a machine, You're out of equilibrium, you're here, oops, let's trade and get to equilibrium. I mean, it's the allocation of scarce means to given ends, right? That kind of Lionel Robbins definition. See, the trouble is that it slowly moved away from being that over time. Over time, more and more, I would argue that it's influenced by other natural sciences, hint, hint, this is machine dreams. It's influenced actually by the rise of the computer and so forth. And in being influenced that way, more and more the market becomes defined as being some kind of information processor instead. Now, see, information processor, static allocation machine, they are not the same, even though, luckily, computer machine, internal combustion engine machine, machines. But, other than that, it's really, really different, okay? Now, given that that's true, how do neoclassicals talk about the problems that we are concerned with at this conference? Mostly, they talk about market failures. And people really get kind of misled by this because, there's a kind of a vernacular sense. A market failure means, whoa, everything's falling apart and people are jumping out of windows and stuff. And it isn't like that at all, okay? Market failures here mean you do not reach Pareto optimality. It's an incredibly, it's a very narrow notion of what failure could mean. And what's doubly interesting is how that failure comes about, at least when it comes to issues like pollution. The way it comes about is because there are these things called externalities. See, I'm sure you've heard all this language before, but you got to understand, this is all the neoclassical package. And what is an externality? The way I like to think about it is it's the ways in which the real world doesn't fit the physics model. Okay? That, in fact, what you're talking about is that the individual commodity definitions are not independent enough of each other that you could have pricing of each of them. And I could do this technically if you wanted, you know, like they have to span a space and blah, 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 blah. But whatever, okay? So in a weird sort of way, pollution, when equated to being a problem of externalities, does not debilitate or otherwise hurt nature. So you've got to get used to this. Rather, it hurts the market. Should I say that again? Pollution doesn't hurt nature in this construction. It hurts the market. Okay? So how do you fix it? You fix the market. You got to see that there's a real kind of shell game going on here that's really sort of interesting in a way. You know, the problem isn't in that nature, it's in the market. And the reason for that is because nature and the market are continually being conflated. See, we're coming home to my thesis now, all right? That, you know, there can't be something wrong with nature. It's got to be somehow the market isn't perfect yet or fully elaborated. There's missing markets, whatever. Okay? So, nature can never hurt or destroy the economy. And in fact, Jeremy had some nice quotes from Stiglitz and other people at the beginning of the conference that basically, essentially, you know, document the claim that I'm making. All right? All right, now, you have to differentiate that from the neoliberal approach. And really, this is where the rest of my time is going to be spent. All right? The neoliberal approach, I want to argue, is different. All right? And different in important ways. It's true there's some overlap with neoclassicism for those of you who are going to be sticklers and start, you know, calling me on this, and I'll acknowledge that. But ultimately, in terms of the definitions, it's very different. Okay. First, it's the neoclassicals who really buy into that state and market dichotomy. Everything that's not the market is the state or something, okay? That's actually a neoclassical notion. And so, of course, if you buy into that notion, you immediately believe in what? If you're of a certain political persuasion, laissez-faire, right? All we need is just to get that damned state off our backs, and then the market will do its thing. Actually, weirdly enough, that's a kind of a neoclassical story, okay? It is not the neoliberal story. The neoliberals do not generally make a strong distinction between state and market amongst themselves. Be careful about that, all right? Moreover, for them, and this is really important, what is a market? And by the way, this is why, you know, Hayek got the Bank of Sweden Prize and everything. What is a market? It is a super information processor that knows more than any human being can or ever could know. This is actually really important. It's going to be part of my story shortly. Okay, got that? So the market is, in some sense, this kind of omniscient thing that's above us. It's like it's part of us, but it's separate too. Okay? It's not mechanical, as I'll point out shortly. Well, I'll point it out now. Why not? For them, see, it's important to see what changes and what doesn't change. What changes for them is rules do evolve. They don't believe in society, so I don't have to deal with that, but they believe in rules. Rules evolve, and nature evolves. Remember I told you that the neoclassical story was kind of, you know, relatively static, where there's a kind of identity of nature. And see, for them, nature evolves to ever higher levels of complexity, which we also cannot understand. This is really important. okay? There's been some lovely work on this. I'm going to plug Jeremy and Melinda here. They have a great paper precisely on this whole notion of resilience and the way in which it's kind of developed both by the neoliberals and by the ecologists at the same time. And see, that's just what I'm talking about, right? I mean, there's this back and forth going on all the time. So there's that. And then also, remember I told you that the way that neoclassicals deal with pollution is that externalities don't really exist. I'm sorry, the neoliberals deal with it, is that externalities don't really exist, whereas the neoclassicals believe in externalities. See, this is why they are not the same story at all. See, they can't handle issues of climate change and so forth using externalities because they really don't believe they're there. Okay. Now, for those of you who are in the know, this is the Coase theorem and all that crap, but I'm not going to do that here. I mean, you just need to know that that's what I'm pointing at when I say this thing, okay? Now, here's the point for neoliberals. Science cannot fully comprehend the chaotic complexity of nature and society. You would not expect that it would be able to do so. Only the market has a prayer of understanding the complexity of evolving nature and evolving. See, does this sound like neoclassicism to anyone? No. Okay. So what is the neoliberal prescription? And the rest of the talk is going to illustrate this. The neoliberal prescription is to use a strong state, take over the state, to permit the inscrutable but wise market to find its own accommodation to nature and society. Now, I know some of you are thinking, oh, come on, they don't believe that. Yes, they do. Yes, they do. All right? Why neoliberalism? Here's the question that I'm raising in response to Naomi. I want to know why neoliberals believe what they do and why they win. And I don't think she understands that. All right. I am going to suggest that neoliberals win because they mount a full spectrum response to global warming. They are not at all deeply concerned with getting the right price for carbon. Those are neoclassicals. All right. They're not so sure such a thing exists. All right. Neoliberals, as I say there, play upon the public mistrust of intellectuals. I'm going to come back to the denialism in a minute. But also insist that any perceived problems with markets can be rectified with more markets. This is very important. Whenever you see a so-called market problem, let's try more markets. Let's double down. Okay? But even there, they are open to the idea that that might not be the final solution. We don't know it's the final solution because remember, we don't know what the market knows. So the true solution is unknowable to mere humans. Only entrepreneurial activity pursuing out-of-the-box innovations will truly address the problem in the long run. Okay. Now, what's interesting about their view, which I'm going to describe in more detail, is that they don't propose one response. See, and that's, hint, hint, forward-looking here. That's why they win. They don't propose one response. They propose a number of responses to any perceived problem like global warming. But those different responses operate in different time frames. One is kind of like for short term, here let's do something now to kind of so that the other side doesn't win. Then there's a medium term solution, and then there's a kind of a long term solution. And I state this here, but I'd be willing to have anyone afterwards challenge it. I think the left has nothing that's remotely as politically sophisticated as this. Nothing. All right. What do they got? Here's what they got. And by the way, this is not the whole thing either. I mean, this is just the stuff that I can document because, and illustrate my point, which is it's a full spectrum response. Okay? What they got is first they got denialism. See, but here's what I want you to begin to entertain. Denialism is just one component to the project. It's not, and it might not even be the major component. Another component is to immobilize more direct carbon emission abatement through elaborate carbon trading schemes. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. So really, most carbon trading schemes, cap and trade, are neoliberal, and I'll say why in a minute. Okay? And then the long-term utopian is to foster entrepreneurial attempts to restructure and re-engineer nature through a commercialized segment of scientists with science fiction scenarios of planet geoengineering. Okay? Now, why are these things all neoliberal, and why do they go together? Well, first, I want, for those of you who are, might say, well, wait a minute, it's all in your head, they don't say this. No single neoliberal thinker proposes the whole package, the full Monty, okay? Individually, each of these parts come from different parts of the neoliberal thought collective. But what's interesting is they coordinate, so this really is a full spectrum response, okay? Now, I want to suggest that this is not special to global warming. You see this all over the map of neoliberal sorts of proposals. Sometimes neoliberal proposals seem to be totally antithetical to one another. Think of, for those of you who are into it, think of Friedman's monetarism, and then this kind of crazy free banking stuff, which comes out of Hayek and so forth. Okay? You'd say, whoa, those are two wildly different things. See, what's weird is that both are promoted simultaneously by the same think tanks. Think about that. See? Why? Moreover, for those of you who feel like we all have to check back with the Pope to see if it's really neoliberal, Hayek himself never actually proposed any of the three components that I'm discussing. All he ever did in his writing was say that the market would somehow handle environmental problems. And what I want to convince you of is the full spectrum approach exists to make that be true. So in a sense, he just points the way, they develop. Okay? And another thing that happens is that all of these things need state power. So this is not about laissez-faire, da-da-da-da. The state has to intervene in all of these things in order to even begin to make them happen. Okay, let's talk about denialism. I'm circling back to the beginning of the talk now. What's denialism about? I'm going to suggest something to you. I would suggest that most of the people who are serious thinkers in the neoliberal thought collective don't think that they are going to change the science. By the same token, I would argue that originally the tobacco companies didn't think that they were going to change the science either. See, I mean, sometimes it helps to look at the tobacco strategy to see how this works, okay? They don't think they're going to change the science. What's the purpose of this? It is to fog the mind of the general populace in the short run, to slow and obstruct any action by opponents on reducing carbon emission, to buy time for the other components. Do you understand? Do I need to say that again? That basically, this is a stopgap, a short-term stopgap, to buy time so that the other components can come into play, because they have a much longer time horizon than, obviously, just giving kids little books to say, go bug your teacher about global warming or something. That's easy, right? However, it is neoliberal for a number of reasons. The most important one is that they do believe in the marketplace of ideas. See, and I don't have time to go into this. They honestly think that it's okay to pump lots of noise into the marketplace of ideas. That doesn't hurt things. No, see, you think I'm joking. I'm not. That if you understand the way their understanding of the marketplace works, to pump noise in the general populace is not a bad thing at all. Let me put it this way. For neoliberals, income is always going to be unequal, and the more unequal, the better, because that just gives people more incentive to struggle and try to climb the greasy pole and all the rest of it. Inequality is a necessary side effect of capitalism for these people. Well, if it's true for income, it's true for knowledge, too. Chew on that. Most people will be stupid. A number of them say this and write it. Most people will be stupid. It's just the way it is. See, they have a theory. Moreover, well, I've got that there, so I'll let that go. Now, okay, so denialism, notice what I'm saying. Denialism is just a short-term stopgap in the larger project. How about carbon trading? Carbon trading is neoliberal. For those of you who know some of the history of it, it goes back to Coase, not surprisingly. And it's about Coase's deconstruction of the whole idea of public goods, that if we just allow the property rights to be exchanged, we will end up in a better situation than if we force people to react to the existing property rights. Okay. Now, for neoliberals, they like this because inventing more property rights is the best way to attack the left. Why? Because once you start new property rights, people fight like hell to keep them. They're largely irreversible outside of a revolution or something. Okay? So they actually like this, okay? Because what this does is this puts something in place that's very hard to reverse. But also, under the smokescreen of efficiency, we know that basically what ends up in most carbon trading schemes is all kinds of state subsidies bestowed on large existing polluters. Come on, it's the history of this. Anyone who's looked into this knows that this is true. This is the way it always works. There are grandfather clauses. And then, moreover, they inflate the number of permits through all kinds of offsets and other tricks and so forth and so on. This is the history of these schemes. See, I'm surprised that people here aren't willing to stand up and say this. I think I've got a, where's my little, yeah, there you go, yes. There's the European trading scheme price over the last year. Okay? What happens? They try to shore it up. They start off with good intentions. Oh, the cap's real this time, and all this stuff. And then, basically, the offsets kick in. All the other, goodies kick in. And there are so many of these that basically the price falls and falls and falls. By the way, this is not the first time. It collapsed at least twice in the last decade. The supposedly private Chicago trading exchange that was started in Chicago closed for many of the same reasons. We could just go on and on and on, okay? Now, see, what's interesting about this is, don't they know this? See, I want you to think about that. Don't they know this? That these schemes almost always collapse, and, even worse, where's the left in this, but still, okay? Now, usually it's justified under the idea that we have to allow them to innovate. And see, innovate starts to move us into the third project, okay? We have to let them innovate, even though it blew up the global economy once before. Let's double down. Let's try it again. Okay? Basically, the attempt to justify this is an attempt to conflate whatever goes on with these new markets with technological innovation. This is a metaphor that has almost no grounding in reality. They are not similar at all. It's the way that they have to justify this. It's almost like, sure, it's going to fail a lot of times. Didn't the first 5 combustion engines fail? You see what I mean? It's the same old story again, right? Okay? No, I'm serious. This is how the story works, okay? But most importantly, and I want to stress this, for all the reasons that I've just identified, including, by the way, not encouraging any kind of technological innovation in the direction of saving carbon emissions, carbon trading does nothing to slow global warming. That's very important, because maybe that's the object. Maybe that's the object. Look, you were all nodding when I said that they all failed. Think about it. They know that. They are not stupid. I have been continuously impressed how brilliant they are. They are not stupid. What's the big long-term fix? The big long-term fix is geoengineering by private firms to alter the climate. That's where we're headed. That's the real objective. But see, this one takes a long time, right? Because you have to gear up all these scientists and kind of get them on your side and get them to, believe in these ridiculous science fiction-y things and stuff like that. I mean, that doesn't happen overnight. Fog denial can happen overnight. This takes time, okay? And this version makes pact with neoliberal scientists to produce the venture capital entrepreneurial solutions to previously market-induced environmental degradation. If you want to know what I mean here, these are attempts to enhance the Earth albedo, the reflective index of the Earth, with lots of particles in the upper atmosphere, or space mirrors. See what I mean by science fiction? Lots of space mirrors. Yeah, right. CO2 sequestration, which, by the way, is just as science fiction-y as the space mirrors. The ocean seeding, the fracking storage, so forth and so on. By the way, I was just reading yesterday the latest issue of Nature, lead article. Ocean seeding by iron creates excess algae, which then sink to the bottom. Hooray. It's coming. All right? Basically, these are appeals. Don't you see, this is the attractive side of neoliberalism. You got to understand that, right? That neoliberalism isn't just all kind of dour and, hey, you're all going to have to, put on more sweaters and stuff like that. It's not like that. It's like, hey, tomorrow we're going to have space mirrors. Look, even I get a little, Yeah, okay. All right. Now, here is an example which shows you, I think, that the purpose of these geoengineering things is also ultimately not to reduce carbon emissions. Okay? And how many of you have heard of Spice Trial? Oh, get on it. This is the cool new neoliberal thing, okay? I mean, you got to be with it. Like most neoliberal prescriptions, the most important fact concerning this tortured marriage of science and corporate commodification is that it doesn't work. Let me relate one incident. For some inexplicable reason, the British Royal Society has been one of the biggest insider boosters of geoengineering. Partly for that reason, one of the earliest consortia of scientists seeking to mount a pilot program for injecting particles into the stratosphere has been the British Stratospheric Particle Injection Climate Engineering Project, SPICE, okay? Headquartered at Bristol and Cambridge universities. SPICE announced in 2011 that it would use a weather balloon to lift a 1 kilometer high hose to spray an aerosol as proof of concept. Now, this actually is not the real thing, because the real thing would have to be sulfur dioxide to increase the albedo. But you know, that's like a poison. So we don't want to talk about that right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to do it with water just to show it as a proof of concept, okay? Now, this, believe it or not, provoked a huge hue and cry in Britain with over 50 scientific organizations opposing even this limited test project. In other words, they said, this is fake, this will get people's hopes up, don't do it. In the current neoliberal circumstances, mere political opposition, resorting to reasoned arguments of this sort, were not sufficient to stop a well-funded scientific cadre with some ceremonial credibility and political clout. No. What got the experiment canceled, and it was just canceled last May, all right, before it finally was carried out, was a dispute among the team over intellectual property. Two members of SPICE, Hugh Hunt and Peter Davidson, had filed for a patent for the apparatus for transporting and blah, blah, blah in the Earth's atmosphere by a balloon, dirigible or airship, without informing the other members of the team. Other participants, learning of this, called the experiment to a halt. Just as in so many other areas of modern science, the faculty here occupied dual roles as academic researchers and CEOs of their own startup firms. Okay. So, there are a number of ironies to the SPICE thing. I mean, one is that, do you know that the first example of traded permits was sulfur dioxide? So, you know, first we control it with, yeah, do you get it? First we control it with cap and trade, and then we spew the shit out when we want to geoengineer instead, okay? But, of course, the further irony is that the only thing that can stop this project, or these kind of projects, are further controversies over commercialization. It's the only thing that can stop them now. Mere politics could not. All right? So you think I forgot about Naomi, but I haven't. This is one of the reasons why Naomi's wrong. Do you see this? Naomi's wrong. Why? Because there's neoliberal science as well. And it just takes time to gin it up. See, science can be on the side of the neoliberals too. This whole Bernal idea that science is on our side is long gone. All right? Now, I know we all like science fiction. Why is this, in a sense, not a solution either? It's not a solution because it cannot be tested ahead of time. Once you spew that shit up there, it ain't coming down very fast. All right? It involves unilateral actions in violation of scads of international treaties. Think about this. It's like, yeah, sure, let's just go ahead and, you know, and it doesn't have to be this. You know, let's just go ahead to the Pacific Ocean and just, you know, fill it with algae. No one will care, right? Moreover, it imagines that a few corporations can hold the entire globe hostage for short-term profit. That, see, it's not really about fixing the problem. It's about finding a new way to make truly global. I mean, you guys talk about globalization. You ain't seen nothing yet. This is truly globalized profit. And finally, it doesn't attack the root causes. If you look at all the lists that I've provided, none of them actually stop CO2 emissions from rising. Think about that. Now, we're almost there. I know it's been a little involved. Do you see how none of these projects in and of themselves actually reduce CO2 emissions? That's the point. That's the point. Basically, let me summarize, and then this will be the last slide, I think. Okay. Basically, the left gets snookered, right? They want to do something about CO2. So what happens? They say, oh, come on, you got to be realistic, you know, let's get some kind of cap and trade. You know, people, and I think a lot of people, environmentalists, know that cap and trade doesn't really do it. But they say, well, we got to start somewhere. It's kind of like this American idea that, you know, we're going to have health care by, you know, insurance mandate. Yeah, right. You know, we got to start somewhere. Okay. And so let's start here. So do you see what happens? Is that the left gets signed on to the dynamic. Not just to the policy, but to the dynamic. And the dynamic is none of these things are actually going to, in any serious way, close down CO2 emissions. So what is the hope? Remember what I said neoliberalism is. Neoliberalism is the idea that the market knows more than any of us. It is smarter than any of us. The real neoliberal prescription is to let the market do its thing over time. And do you see how this whole set of schemes achieves that? It achieves the neoliberal prescription. These guys are brilliant. Don't you think? So, let's have a little discussion. The left needs a different kind of biopolitics, don't you think? Political understandings, I would argue, of nature and society come first. Science doesn't naturally support anything. There's neoliberal science, and then there's other kinds of science. The left, in order to even get into the conversation, which I would argue they're not right now, even to get into the conversation, has to promote rival versions of nature economy that resist reduction to neoliberal scripts. But of course, you have to understand the script first in order not to be sucked into it. All right? Now, I don't have time for this one, but I would also argue, remember I told you that neoclassical economics is different from neoliberalism. Neoclassical economics is not the way to fight it either, I would argue. What it does, because the neoliberal profession has, the neoclassical profession has become more neoliberal, is that it becomes less and less likely that that could be a stand from which one could resist this story. I think we or the left or whoever, has to have an alternative to this idea of the market as an invariant natural information processor more powerful than any human cognition. That if you can't crack that, see, this is weird. That's not the thing that people most often think of when they think of this. If you can't crack that, I don't see how you can have a plausible, alternative, well-developed political program which has short-term things, medium-term things, and long-term things. Okay? Yeah, I know, you want the answer, right? I mean, I'm just trying to get you there first, to see how strong they are. Okay? How's that? I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I'll just stop there. Yeah.